Hey, welcome back. Energy Physio, wrapping up the Ultimate Guide to Sports Medicine. Just kind of breaking this thing down a little bit still. Coming into the last couple pages on recovery, what that looks like, what to expect. And so we'll jump right in. So over here they're talking about what to expect during your rehab. And they particularly have this block about before you get back into the game, before you return to sport, this is what you need to be having going on. So one is allow time. And yes, that's obvious. How much time is totally variable. But you do need to allow time. I think there's just a conversation that needs to happen around how much time you need to return to sport, more particularly what should happen during the time between injury and return to sport. Stay positive. I think that's a good one. It's very frustrating for an athlete, a recreational athlete, an active person to have some type of injury and be kind of down and out. It's really easy to get down on yourself when you can't do the things that you're used to doing and you're kind of stuck on the sideline a little bit. So staying positive is important. You got to find some things that you can do. This is why I think it's really important when we're dealing with athletes who are used to training daily or at least several times a week, being able to find ways that they can still train without having an upset or a setback, because this is going to help them maintain their sanity throughout the rehab process. Another thing it says before you get back in the game is restore full range of motion. And full range of motion is important, but the control of that motion is even more important. And this does bring up the conversation of normal versus common. Coming out of rehab industry where we're kind of bringing patients in and churning them out, what we consider within functional limits or within normal limits doesn't necessarily mean that it's totally appropriate. What I mean by that is normal range of motion is expressed through certain movement-related positions, like normal hip, knee, and ankle range of motion is sitting in the bottom of a pistol squat, which is a single leg squat with your opposite leg out in front of you. Common range of motion is not that. So there are age-related normals. They're called norms. They're really age-related commons. And research shows that as we age, we have decreases in range of motion. I think that comes from lifestyle throughout the lifespan, particularly around moving into school and sitting a lot, moving into college, sitting a lot, moving into the workplace and sitting a lot. You start to develop range of motion restrictions. But what we see commonly among certain age range does not mean that is normal. So within normal limits and functional limits, doesn't necessarily mean your range of motion is normal. And normal range of motion being expressed through certain positions is what should dictate, are you ready to return to sport from a motion and mobility standpoint? Regain muscle strength. It is very important for your muscles to be strong and resilient and be able to resist stress. But muscle strength alone really holds no value if your movement strength is not worth anything. And so before you get back in the game and return to sport, you should have strong muscles, but you should also have very strong movement. If we look at pro sports, even high school and college sports, or even just recreational athletes and lifters, these people are very strong and yet they still get injured. So strength in and of itself is not a very good indicator of should you return to sport or not. This is regain skills for a safe return to sport. My plea for this is that skill has nothing to do with safely returning to a sport. Sport-related skill, you can play the sport with no skill. You're not going to be very good at it, but you can play safely with no skill. So skill really is not something we should be considering for return to sport. Now, if we're going to talk about movement skill, that's a different topic of discussion, because that is very important. Are you a skilled mover? Do you have full range of motion for your movements? Can you control those movements very well? And are you strong through the entire range of motion of those movements? But as far as sport-related skill, it's a non-conversation. Regain confidence. This is a big one, because if you're not confident in the way you're moving, chance of injury goes way up. And so the question here is, how do you regain confidence? And then the last thing they say is gradually returning to sport, which we're of the opinion that that doesn't really exist. You're either playing sports or you're not. There's no such thing as a gradual return. So in the next video, we're going to really start to break this down on what is normal versus common, what type of strength are we trying to regain, what type of skill are we looking to improve on, and how exactly are we going to regain that confidence. Moving on to this next sheet is talking about how soon can you return to your normal activities. And then everything they list over here is physiologic time only, like bone heals in 6 weeks, soft tissue heals in 8 weeks. But it doesn't really lend anything to the time frame that is required for return to sport. So it also lists some ligament tears, shoulder dislocation, shin splints. Their physiologic healing times are listed, but this doesn't mean anything for actual sport and how long that's going to take to do it in a safe way. It says your doctor and PT will determine the specifics for how you return to sport. In my experience, doctors base their return to sports on physiologic healing times, but it doesn't tie in range of motion, movement skill, movement strength, the things you're doing to actually regain confidence in a way that makes sense. And so we're going to come up with a better way to talk about your time frames for return to sport. And these physiologic time frames don't have any criteria for return to sport. So we can know that a bone is going to be pretty well healed in 6 weeks, but it doesn't really give us any time-based things to address balance, movement, stability, and range of motion, and all those things. And then lastly, it's talking about how can your physical therapist help you in your recovery process. And anything that's bad in physical therapy is a direct result of physical therapists doing it poorly, not educating well enough, and not educating just enough in general. And so the general conception about physical therapy, which is listed here, and I think it's a really bad stigma, is that this injury equals this exercise. It's like we're just giving exercise prescription for these cookie cutter problems, and that's just not what physical therapy should be. But that's what the general stigma around it typically is. The other thing it says is strengthen the right muscles. Like we already talked about, a lot of these people are getting injured and they're incredibly strong. So it has nothing to do with muscle strength. We really need to shift the conversation towards movement strength. But this idea that, oh, I've got this problem, I should do these exercises and it's going to go away, is not a very effective solution to any of the problems, because there's so much more involved in rehab than just exercise. Just from a rehab perspective, there's manual therapy, there's soft tissue dysfunction, there's global movement dysfunction, neurological deficits, but then we also have to talk about sleep and stress and nutrition and how those things play a part. And then we just need to totally get rid of this idea that strengthening the right muscles is going to make a difference. So keep your eyes peeled for the next videos where it's really going to get fun, where we're going to talk about how do you move from injury to return to sport in a way that makes sense. And now, being true Americans that we are, we want the quick fix. If we're going to do this right, there's just not a quick fix. There's got to be some check boxes we've got to get checked off, and there's got to be some criteria that we need to meet over and over and over before we can say, hey, you know what, I'm ready, I'm confident, and I can get back in the game with low risk of injury. So keep your eyes out for the next one. We'll be talking about how to get it done right. See you later.